And sometimes you have to also just like, I know it sounds so like such a stereotype, but like listen to your gut to some degree, and I think also realizing like it's okay to mess up. You can go back to something, or you can just say like I made a bad decision, and like I tried something for a year. I don't know if this is still the case, but when I was in undergrad, like I felt like everyone was like, I must be a doctor, and if I'm not a doctor, like I will fail. It's like, okay, you could be a doctor later, or like maybe you might hate being a doctor, or like it's okay to mess up.
You're listening to When You Grow Up, a podcast that matches Johns Hopkins students with the people they dream of being in the future. Tune in to access intimate conversations with CEOs, entrepreneurs, and artists, and hear answers to the questions we all wrestle with. Will I ever feel ready? Can I do it? And most importantly, was it worth it? When You Grow Up is available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
Hi, my name is Tere'ssa Fleming. I am a senior at Johns Hopkins. I study political science, pre-law, and today I'm speaking with Nina Zelich.
Hello, my name's Nina Zelich, and I am currently based in El Paso, Texas. I'm originally from Denver, Colorado. I work at the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, where I'm a liaison officer. And when I was at Johns Hopkins undergrad, I studied French. I have my undergrad degree in French, and I have my Master's of Arts in Teaching from Johns Hopkins as well.
Well, hello, Nina. Thank you so much for, again, sitting down and taking the time to talk with me today. I am so excited to talk to you about all of the work that you do. Excited to the point that I am outside.
I can see where you are. I know that listeners might not be able to, but I know exactly where you are in Baltimore, even though I haven't been in Baltimore for the past 4 months. So I'm really excited as well.
Awesome. Well, let's just jump right in. I have quite a few questions, so hopefully we can get through all of them today. My first question is, what do you think when you were a kid, what did you think you wanted to do when you grew up?
So I definitely wanted to be a teacher. Both my parents were teachers in the suburbs of Denver, even though I grew up in the city, and I loved playing school. I loved, I think mostly because I got to boss around my little brother, and also I loved office supplies. And so I could be a teacher with my office supplies, and my one student who mostly he wanted to pretend he was a horse or an alligator. I ended up teaching for a few years, but sometime in undergrad, I decided that I really wanted to do refugee law, and so that's what I actually have ended up being able to do. But I still sometimes use my bossing around skills, and I get to play with office supplies, so it's ended well so far.
I saw that you taught at Baltimore City Schools, and I volunteer with a few students through the Baltimore City public school system. And with my internship now, that's something that we focus on. That's just so important. So I thought that was really amazing when I saw that on your resume. When has your career path surprised you? I know that you kind of did take a detour going from a teacher and then moving into law school and then working in the refugee work. So any point at that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that as I was preparing for this, just thinking about is like, it's not so much like, I don't see it as detours because I've had a very nonlinear career in a lot of ways. I think I've always known exactly the area I wanted to work in, even if it had ended up teaching, right? Like that would have been a public service approach to work. And maybe I had done a lot of ESL tutoring, and while at Johns Hopkins had been really involved with what was then a project in Southeast Baltimore in Highlandtown, the Refugee Youth Project. It's part of Baltimore City Community College. And so I think I knew that I either wanted to do immigration and refugee work. And so my career, it's the whole thing, like sometimes I'm just surprised that I am where I am, but it's also been really cool to really stay focused on sort of one issue area, but come at it from all different ways. And I think I've always been open to like taking some fairly big risks, including leaving the Department of Justice to go have a senior level leadership role at a nonprofit in Baltimore. And so I think it's always surprised me, but it's somehow working out. But I haven't had this one goal, like I must be a lawyer at a law firm doing environmental law. Like it's just as long as I'm working in like refugee work, I think I've been fairly, well, I definitely have been pretty happy.
Well, that's good to hear. Was there one sort of class that inspired you to go into refugee work?
9/11 happened my freshman year of undergrad. Like I had been on the East Coast for 2 weeks of my life, and I think everything sort of changed in the world. But certainly, I think just at Johns Hopkins, and I think the thing that it wasn't a class, it was like probably my second or third week at Johns Hopkins, I saw like a poster for the Refugee Youth Project. Like you used to be able to like pull those tabs and like call someone and you could volunteer. And I was pretty like lonely and miserable on the East Coast, and like having that outlet, like the Refugee Youth Project became essentially like my life. And working in Southeast Baltimore for 3 years, like it was on the ground field work for 3 years, like all of the time, like super invested in refugee communities in Baltimore. I interned, and then just that was like I knew that that was what I wanted to do. And so it was the volunteer experience more than like a class. So I think similar to sort of what you're saying, it sounds like you had like an outward facing class, if you will. Yeah, it was a very inward facing campus and school. Like my first day of school at Johns Hopkins, they're like, don't leave the campus. And I was like, oh my God, like what is wrong with, where am I? I was so upset. And so it was so amazing to just be able to like leave all the time, every day. And so, yeah, I think it sounds like we have a lot in common.
Yeah, and actually get to see the work that people are doing and the real stories that people are facing. I'm from Baltimore. My family's been in Baltimore for hundreds of years, so it's really nice to see now even more students are more involved in the getting out and how are we going to help Baltimore? How are we going to rewrite the wrongs? All that sort of stuff. So I think you must have started an initiative back when you were there to get us all moving on the ground, because we all are. I know that you mentioned that you went to law school and that I saw that you went to Michigan. And I've been thinking a lot about law school, coming into my senior year. Is that my move next, or do I go into a master's program? And I was hoping if you had any tips on how necessary did you find law school, or would you find the master's program just as beneficial?
Yeah, it's sort of this like common question. And I think a lot of it depends on a lot of things, right? Like I worked, I think, for almost 6 or 7 years before I went to law school. Like I taught, and then I managed refugee resettlement programs. And so it was like a real firm decision that I knew that I wanted to go to law school. And I didn't necessarily know, I didn't even really know any lawyers. Like I didn't even know, even by then, and I had been working, like I didn't know even necessarily what lawyers did, like traditional lawyers. And so one thing that I realized is I definitely, even now, am not like a traditional lawyer, and I never will be. But what the law gives you is like a framework and logic, and it opens up a lot of like opportunities. And I think so you can do policy, you can do advocacy, you can do protection with UNHCR, which is what I do. And I think that's like what I've wanted to do forever. And so I think you can not go to law school. Like one of my mentors at UNHCR did not go to law school, but she does protection at a very high level. And a lot of people do protection. They haven't gone to law school. Master's degrees like at, Tufts, or not to like say that I'm suggesting that program, but I think you can get exactly where I am without having gone to law school. For me, it made sense. The work I did at DOJ, I couldn't have done without being a lawyer. So I clerked at an immigration court in New York City, and then worked on legal programming and access to justice issues. So like, if I ever want to go back into the government, I think having a law degree helps, certainly opens a lot of doors, but those doors probably maybe could have opened anyways. I think it's a very versatile degree. It really just depends. Also, I think you definitely don't need to spend the amount of money I spent. Like, I wish someone had like said that, because I think there's like amazing other law schools. I love Michigan. It was great. I wanted to do refugee law, and that was like all I wanted to do. And Michigan has an incredible refugee law program. think there's more schools now that have refugee law programs or immigration law, if that's like refugee enough for you. So it just depends.
Thank you for being so honest on you don't have to spend as much as maybe you did to go to law school, because that is, I know, a big factor that definitely pushes people out of law school. So I know that you mentioned you worked for the Department of Justice and you've worked for companies like the IRC. We've both worked for the IRC before, and now the UN. Do you prefer government work over these nonprofit work, or do you have an opinion between either or is it all, again, focused back on what can help refugees the most?
I mean, I don't have an opinion. I think everything that I've done, I've like loved and had this like growth mentality. And I think just sort of figuring out how all the puzzle pieces fit together. I'm really grateful that I've done nonprofit and government. I think probably the most comfortable place for me has been like an international organization, which is like definitely not government and definitely not nonprofit, but in this like very unique space in the middle. That has access in a very different way and can speak with a voice that is heard in a different way. I think also one of the things that can be hard about nonprofit work is that like your funding is typically always in question. Even if you're working at a giant nonprofit that's really good at bringing in money, you're sometimes like the mission can be sort of more tied to the money. And I think at an international organization that's grounded in like a convention and like a mandate, a lot of the decision making, of course it's often still about funding, but is like, is this within our mandate? And then we're making decisions from there. And so I think that's been refreshing. And that's probably more similar to government, but I've loved it all.
No, that's definitely something that I've experienced as well, the whole funding issue and trying to figure out what the intentions are for everyone. I think everyone's trying to do good, but it's a back and forth. I know that you are now at the UN. Did you always want to work for the UN, or is it just something that when it happened, it happened?
Yeah, like I wanted to do international work. I wanted to be like Carla De Ponte. That was like what I wanted to do. Just different than saying I wanted to be a lawyer in an environmental law firm. But I think, I mean, this is pretty much a dream job. Like I did an externship in Geneva with UNHCR. I worked overseas with UNHCR in the Dominican Republic. It always has felt like probably the most comfortable of all of the different pieces. I think with eyes wide open though, like it's not an easy career path. I have 3 children, and I think there's a lot of reasons why UNHCR works in deep field and hard to work in places with family. And so I think figuring out a way to have both a family and a career at UNHCR is not something that I just started at UNHCR in October, but where the answers are easy for a lot of people, especially women that I know. And so figuring that out, and I know UNHCR is working on also figuring that out, but that's something that just like eyes wide open. And when you say like people don't really understand maybe the realities, like the realities are it's like hyper competitive, and often a lot of the conversations are in like over tea or coffee is like how to get the next job at UNHCR, like how many places have you worked? And that can be a little bit sort of exhausting in a way. So I think just figuring that out and how flexible can you be in your life around moving. But I so far feel like I've made good choices and have good enough, but have a really supportive spouse and have been able to take some risks around flexibility, but certainly not in the way that others might have been able to.
Yeah, a lot of time it is, I feel like, women forging their own path on how are we going to try to do it all. And I mean, I don't know. I have no answers. So I was wondering if you had any recommendations on a good work-life balance.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any like magic. I don't think there's a magic way. And I think just I have a lot of like role models and people that I've been able to to lean on and to talk to, like really powerful, amazing women. I think often just looking to other people who have found a way. There's like no one's, at least in my experience, no one's gonna like give you that way or let like that path. And I think typically humans are like super resilient and can figure it out, but it's taken a lot of work and a lot of balancing and sort of recognition that I'm not perfect at like anything. And so another thing I talk about a lot is like being willing to live in the gray, which can be hard for a lot of people, but where like I'm not a perfect mother or spouse or family member or community member or worker, but I think there's like gray in all of that.
Well, maybe I just have to get more comfortable with being inside the gray. Maybe that is something that if I journal enough and as I age, it will come to me. Do you have any tips on how to deal with situations where you might have to drastically pivot suddenly or deal with that gray area ambiguity for us who might be a little more uncomfortable in that area than we should be?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes the change is not immediate. Like you sometimes feel like, especially in refugee work and protection, like it can be a really long game to see change with protections. And so I think also being able to live with that and have some degree of patience. Like there's immediate, sometimes like short-term wins, like something you do for a case like solves a problem for the person. But then the bigger picture sort of policy framework is incredibly hard to move or to change. But we have some degree of obligation to keep at it. Has there been an example where like I've had to pivot? Yeah, like all the time. Like when things are going wrong or you feel like you're beating your head against the wall, and whatever approach you're taking to be it like a protection problem or a relationship that you really need to work in order for something to shake loose at work. And I think sometimes taking a step back, as you mentioned, like journaling or getting a good night's rest and like not sending like angry emails or can be good practices. And I think sometimes also, and this is cool about nonprofit work, right? Like depending on the nonprofit is a willingness to take risks. And that means sometimes failure and like needing to pivot and say like, okay, what did we learn from this? How can we, one, either do it better or like never do that again? It didn't have the outcomes we wanted. And that's scary for organizations and people, but it is also fun in a way and means pivoting. So.
Were you comfortable living within that gray area, easily able to pivot while at Hopkins, or was that something that you had to learn when you had to do it multiple times throughout your career?
Probably both. I mean, at Hopkins, as I mentioned, I started out with, I think it was called international relations, my major, and I was miserably unhappy. Like the politics were really difficult, like what was being taught. I realized like, here are the things that make me happy. Like, let me get what I need out of this. Like, I have lifelong friends from Hopkins, but it was like I needed to pivot to like, I'm gonna have a French degree and like make my way in this world to be okay. And so yeah, I think there was like that gray and that pivot. That's like I think, I mean, people do way harder pivots, but so yeah, I mean, I think that was not easy to some degree, but has worked out well. So I've been maybe more comfortable in the gray than expected of like a hard charging lawyer who seems to have it all together. But I think it's like human stuff.
Human stuff. That's what we should fight to rename the podcast. That's us every day, all day, just trying to make it through the human stuff. No, I think that's really great advice and something that a lot of students go through where they come in a certain major and they're absolutely miserable and they're trying to figure something else out. I came in as writing seminars and I was like, that is not my move anymore. And then I went into IS and then I went into poli-sci. So whatever makes you feel happy. I do have hope that we can all come out at the end where we want to be. Do you have any habits that you've developed to overcome these sort of challenges that you face within your career, even if it's a time management issue or just like an immediate challenge with maybe a change in administration or
I mean, some habits are like exercise, like, and some of it, I mean, that's like essential. Like I can't, like I do yoga, like yoga with Adrian, like almost every day.
I do
Like,
yoga with Adrian.
oh, really?
I'm
I'm
obsessed.
like, me too. So is my daughter, and actually, so
And
is my,
Benji, oh my goodness,
yeah.
Benji, I love him. He's like the celebrity dog I want to meet.
So I mean, I think, yeah, like that's a habit. And then like I love to read for pleasure, and I schedule that. Like I'm gonna read whatever, like 40 pages a day or 30 minutes. Like that is really important. Like those are habits. Signing off from my computer is a habit. Like we eat dinner together every night pretty religiously, and like that's a habit. Because you could seriously, especially in my job, you could work like 17 hours a day, and I work a lot of hours. Like I get up really early, but I need that time.
I think anything to try to alleviate stress is something definitely that Hopkins students we think about a lot, and we think about even moving forward into these careers that are lots of hours, high stress. Also, my next question is that you talked a lot about taking risks and being able to do the pivot, but what is your process of going through and taking those risks?
So I mean, I think there's like the logic, the pros and cons, and sometimes, at least for me with this job with UNICEF, like not maybe a lot of outward logic to, I think at some point you have to let go of like, what are people going to say about this, right? And like, what do other people do who have 3 children? Like they maybe don't move across the country in a pandemic to someplace where they have no family and they've only been a few times. And so, which is El Paso. And so I think at a certain point, like that made sense for me and my family. And I think sort of not feeling like I have to give up on things that I've worked really hard for. So yeah, if I had made a T-chart of this, like, no, it's been like all cons probably. And so it's sometimes overriding the cons, and sometimes you have to also just like, I know it sounds so like such a stereotype, but like listen to your gut to some degree, and like it might feel yeah, like wrong and scary. And I think also realizing like it's okay to mess up. You can go back to something, or you can just say like I made a bad decision, and like I tried something for a year. I think, I don't know if this is still the case, but when I was in undergrad, like I felt like everyone was like, I must be a doctor, and if I'm not a doctor, like I will fail. They didn't talk like that, but I think it's like, okay, you could be a doctor later, or like maybe you might hate being a doctor, or like I don't. And so I think there's some I've been lucky enough to be able to have that flexibility. I know like maybe not everyone like can have it, but it's okay to mess up.
Those are exactly the words that I think need to be printed everywhere on Hopkins's campus. It's okay to mess up.
I mean, I think also like when I'm hiring people, I was just talking about this with someone. It's like I'm looking for emotional intelligence and maturity, like more than like the single-mindedness, like I must win at all costs. Like I have been the top of my whatever, like class, field. And so I think there's that too, is it's the empathy and yeah, like really emotional intelligence and maturity and like thoughtfulness and willingness to listen, which like you can have all those things, and if you cultivate those things, I think you sometimes might be more willing to take risk, or maybe at least judge less. And sometimes when you're judging less, like you might be more comfortable in your own risk because you don't feel so judged. I don't know, but like when I'm hiring, I think I'm typically not looking for like, this is it. Like I had to be here right now, this minute. If I'm not here, like it all ends.
And I always try to show up in the workplace, and it's something that I've had to learn to be someone that I'd want to work with. and like that you want to be your coworker. And I don't think that sometimes when you are so singularly focused on it, that your intentions always come off the best in the workplace, or that you're even friendly to chat with over lunch. That's always my go-to, trying to hang out with someone over lunch and just get to know people as people before we do whatever we do in our job. To close up our discussion today, I would love to hear any sort of advice you have to share with undergrads who are wanting to go into your field of work.
I think just being committed to an area, I think often helps. It's also okay totally to explore like lots of areas. It might just take you longer. But I think some degree of self-confidence balanced with like maturity and humbleness. But I think being easy on yourself, that there is no one path. Like I've definitely not had a linear path. And frankly, no one I know who works in this field has. And even once you're in this field, like it's still hard, and like being a little easy on yourself around how competitive it is. And it feels like it's gotten more competitive. And so I think going a little easy on yourself, and you might show up more. I liked what you said around being someone you'd want to work with. Like people are then maybe going to want to hire you more.
And going easy on yourself, especially, I think coming from a competitive institution, like we both have experienced like Hopkins, and then going into a competitive workplace, you sometimes don't feel like you have a break. So going easy on yourself in every situation is definitely something I think we all should keep in mind going forward. Do you also have any advice for any undergrads who are stressed about what to do post-graduation? I'm a senior, a majority of my friends are seniors, and we are all just figuring out what to do, leaving a pandemic, leaving schools, like Zoom school, leaving Hopkins. Where do we make the first move?
I mean, I think for me, it was like take any job that would pay me, which was teaching, and then they paid for my master's. Like I needed time, and I knew I like teaching was great. I was like in Baltimore, I got to commit, like I was prioritizing being with my then boyfriend, now husband. And I think it's okay, like you don't have to have all the answers. Like you need probably to make some money, and that's okay. If it's not your dream job, it's probably not going to be. And so going from there is okay.
That I think will make me feel far better in about a year and a half, where I'm like, remember, this is not your dream job. You need to have time. We can just make some money and we will be all right.
But like learning, right? Like I think I've also been able to learn. It wasn't like that was like not my dream job, but I got so much out of it. And so I think there's that too. And so like don't just discount like, oh my God, I must be this one place.
And it was able to start your, journey into service, and especially in a city that you were already putting so much into. I think that's a really great story. You might not have seen it as linear, but it's a really great, like it all makes sense in my head when it all comes together. Maybe I'm too much of a fan of Baltimore.
No, good fan. I think we might be at time, but I'm a huge fan as well.
My name is Tere'ssa Fleming, and on this week's episode, I interviewed Nina Zelich. I wanted to talk to Nina because of her amazing commitment to refugees and always looking forward to bettering her community. In this conversation, we also talk about love of Baltimore, work-life balance, and taking risks. And I learned so much about how to be flexible, live in that gray area, but always know that at the end of the day, your work will make sense as long as you love what you're doing.